When most kids my age were just hitting puberty, I was out on my own, a 7th grade dropout running wild. I earned my degree in the University of the Streets, where my teachers were a bizarre cast of characters, including the likes of Junior Nuts, Demented Dougie Holston, Bobby K, Crazy Dave, Disco, Bobby Bird, Buckles, Computer, AWOL Airborne Paratrooper, JK, and my favorite, a low-life hustling junkie named Mikey Debris. It was a magical time in the city, and I wouldn't trade my experiences for all the money in the world. Computer, 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 computer,
computer. This is the Kings of Punk podcast, and we're doing a real introduction today instead of just chitter chatter.
Yep.
And pitter patter and bullshit. This is a podcast about the theory of subculture, or our theories about it, analysis of it, with really a focus on the punk scene and things in that orbit, I suppose you could say. Doing a little tracing influences to other influences.
Connecting the dots.
Connecting the dots and having a good time while we're at it. I'm Jake Razor. To my left, we have the guy who typically does the intro.
Tyler Hammer. And to my left, we have our good friend.
I'm Tim Roach.
Tim Roach. Using his real name for me, or
if we're being professional today,
maybe,
I suppose
maybe not
for the
his real
time
name.
being.
Maybe it's Gary.
Maybe.
Could be Gary.
We're professional for now. Once we get into talking about the doo-doo man and that kind of stuff, we'll see if that holds
then
up.
I'll become the U.S. bomb master.
Yeah, when the doo-doo man surfaces from the water.
Real hardcore, from the toilet water. Real hardcore fans.
Instantly shattering any illusion of being, professional.
Well, I mean, it has a tangential connection to a real connection to what we're going to be talking today.
Yeah, our real hardcore fans already know what we're going to be talking about.
The true secret elite hardcore fans know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so
what are we talking about?
We are talking about the one and only CRO-MAGS. New York hardcore legends in their own right, influential in many ways, and
influenced in many ways as well.
Yeah. We
interesting blend of influences there that we'll get into, but yeah.
Truly a more interesting band than I think one would think maybe upon first glance. I am not a huge New York hardcore fan, but Age of Quarrel, their first album, has always been an album that I've enjoyed. And I think me and Tim especially, who you are not very much a New York hardcore fan too.
I mean, I used to honestly just, I thought the CRO-MAGS sucked.
And now...
But I mean, actually, going through this, listening to all the records, it's they got a good chunk of... very good songs with some, real bad ones mixed.
Yes,
too,
yeah. Definitely influential band, not just on the sort of what became its own subgenre, New York hardcore, but also on the crossover scene, which is really, I would say probably their most pivotal point of influence is bridging that gap between metal and hardcore punk, for better or for worse.
They were, I would say, they're a band that bridges... that takes us from the early 80s U.S., not even to U.S., the hardcore scene, into the next step forward.
Definitely. And while they were at it, I think some people might underestimate this, especially in the metal world, they totally changed what metal sounded like. I mean, Harley has talked before about meeting fucking Phil Anselmo from Pantera, one of the biggest metal bands ever, and him telling him, Pantera would have never been what we were if it wasn't for the CRO-MAGS. And I think there's a lot of metal bands you could say that about, including even some of the early new metal stuff, again, for better or for worse. Tim, what are you going to say? Go ahead.
I will say, I feel like the CRO-MAGS, they represent the crossover, more in, the bridging of the gap between hardcore and punk. I wouldn't actually say that I don't think they sound like your typical crossover band.
No.
At all.
No. They're crossover in how, Carnivore is crossover.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I would, with Carnivore, would I say that's what crossover sounds like? No, I would probably akin it to more a
say
Crumb
DRI,
Suckers, DRI kind of stuff.
Suicidal,
yeah, suicidal tendencies. Those are more crossover. But listening to Age of Quarrel and even Best Wishes, their second album, you can definitely hear Oh, there is a metal influence more on Best Wishes, that's kind of blending with like their hardcore roots, especially since they were all like involved in, I believe, the hardcore and punk scenes of like the early '80s, I believe.
Yes,
playing in certain
that's
bands before
OGs,
too.
yeah.
Yeah.
Harley especially, right?
Harley is as OG as it can get, and we'll have to get into him in a minute. I reviewed a bit of his book, his autobiography, Life of My Own. I am very, very familiar because I used to listen to it all the time. The audio book of John Joseph's book, Evolution of a Cro-Magnon, which he reads himself, which is a treat as you would expect. There's a part where he's trying to reference Friedrich Nietzsche, and he says Nietzsche like 4 times in a row, and they didn't have him redo it, and it's pretty great.
Well, they knew the guys recording were like, oh no, this is fine.
This is authentic.
We're not gonna take this out. Yeah, like right. He's like not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's maybe set the scene. When exactly did Cro-Mags form, and who was in the band when they started?
Well, yeah, I think one thing I've said about this band for years, and I listened to them for a while without really getting this, I think to fully appreciate this band, and especially to appreciate Age of Quarrel, which is in some ways the only true Cro-Mags record, you kind of do have to know about the people in the band. So they started in a sort of primordial form in like 1982, but that is a far cry from the lineup that people would know. At that point, Harley was playing bass. Paris Mayhew, the classic guitar player, was playing guitar. The drummer was not Jason Mackey yet. It was a different guy whose name, I think John Watson, perhaps, former singer for Agnostic Front. They had a lot of lineup changes always, especially in the early days. One that is noteworthy, I think, is this dude Eric Casanova sang. He was this Puerto Rican kid who was friends with Harley, and him and Harley were the first skinheads in the United States ever. So that was the original singer before John Joseph, a.k.a. John Bloodclot, joined. And there's actually demos from 82 with, I think, Harley playing everything, where you can hear some songs that didn't come back later, as well as, I think, Not Show You No Mercy, but like By Myself, or some of the, or World Peace, like I think that was the first song they ever wrote. You can hear those on those demo recordings.
I think I've heard those, and they're pretty. It's interesting to hear.
For the demos, yeah, and the unreleased songs are kind of cool. You can hear the Oi influence kind of in the unreleased songs, which is something that faded as the band went on, but certainly at that point, the skinhead thing was really crucial to all this, which, if you'd like, we can sort of work up to that and get into a little of Harley's biography, because I think it is a bit important.
Now, and in 82, is this, when is United Blood by Agnostic? Is that 81 or 82?
I'm tempted to say it's 1981.
Okay, I mean,
No,
that would
might have been
but this
82.
kind of them being skinheads kind of makes sense. And OE influence
Yes.
makes absolute perfect sense to me.
United Blood was 82, but regardless, yes, Harley was the Prometheus figure that brought the skinhead thing to the United States. And he is a remarkable individual with a remarkable background. Harley Flanagan was born, I don't remember when. He was born in San Francisco. His mom was like a hippie, and his dad was just some drifter guy. His family history, there's more interesting stuff I won't get into, but she was sort of a drifter, but, she moved to the Lower East Side after traveling to Morocco and all these places with him when he was a little kid. There's pictures of him in Morocco. There's, she knew all the hippies. He wrote a book of poetry when he was, 7 that Allen Ginsberg wrote the intro to. So coming from that background, then they moved to the Lower East Side of New York City in, I believe, the late 60s or 70s, would have been 70s probably. And his mother became a stripper or a go-go dancer there. And he didn't know his dad. Dad wasn't around. And he was, from a very early age, surrounded by, bohemians and artists and poets and weirdos like that. In an environment in the Lower East Side where there were a lot of those people, but also a lot of gangs and drugs and crime and violence on a level that we really have no frame of reference for. It's insane, especially reading his book and hearing it from someone whose work I'm familiar with. Hearing that this stuff was happening in America is remarkable. I mean, you're talking about people getting stabbed and huge brawls and shit happening in broad daylight pretty much every day.
Yeah, this is the 70s, right? Yeah. 70s and 80s New York. Whole different beast than what it is in the last 25
I mean,
years.
the Lower East Side especially.
Yeah.
That is fully tourist territory now, and it was probably the worst part of New York back then, I would assume. One of the worst parts.
not to say I don't really know too many people who do that, but anyone that kind of glamorizes like, yeah, I like New York when it was disgusting and awful and violent and stuff like that. It's like I understand maybe like glamorizing that to a degree, but it's
maybe that's more of a nostalgia
It's like,
thing
eh.
for people.
is it better? I mean, I guess personally I prefer when people aren't constantly in violent conflict with one another.
It's interesting hearing Harley and John talk about it as people who lived through it, because on one hand they don't glamorize it, and I think Harley's thankful that he can live in New York and not have his kids be in danger. At the same time, both of them have good things to say as well. I mean, John Joseph has said repeatedly, all that crazy shit, he wouldn't trade that for all the money in the world, because he learned important things and it was exciting, and it was an environment where you could do what you wanted, and where people like them who wanted to be artists and shit were able to carve out some sort of existence for themselves, albeit a marginal one. And I don't doubt, I could relate to, there's something in John's autobiography where he talks about being a bit of an adrenaline junkie and liking being in dangerous situations, and how people spend all his money doing fucking extreme sports to go do that now. I butchered that New York accent. I won't try it again. But he got all the adrenaline he could handle for free growing up in the Lower East Side and having to try and make it as someone who had nothing. And I think you don't have to glamorize that to sort of at the same time be like, that wasn't good, but I'm glad it happened to me.
Yeah, I think there's also a fine line between living in that environment and then like, well, we should maybe do the opposite of it, which is sterilize everything, have corporations and strip everything of its identity completely,
Kill all the homeless
people,
Rudy
kill all the
Giuliani
small
might have done.
businesses, kill everything, make sure everyone
Pave over all the homeless people.
Yeah, put them in make them in the bridges, that there's
they did that, didn't they?
Oh, they paving over homeless people?
No, I mean like the thing about the bridges,
Turning them into bridges? No, they didn't stack. I don't think they stacked human bodies to fill in like bridge support beams for bridges.
It's probably not a very good,
very
support system either.
Yeah, pretty
Bunch
flimsy.
of
I would
bones.
say. Bones. Bones are. I will say bones are pretty strong, but
Yeah.
wood I think is like stronger, and steel. Forget about it.
Yeah, I mean that'll shatter a bone.
So Harley has a quite an eclectic, young, quite an eclectic youth, moving over, kind of going all over the place, and then ending up
landing in the
in the
Lower East Side and dropping out of school in 7th grade. Again, his mother was this, we'll call her a free spirit.
Yeah.
And he very quickly came in contact with the early punk scene. His aunt Denise of the band The Stimulators he ended up joining was a waitress at Max's Kansas City, famous club that Johnny Thunders and the New York Dolls and all those bands played at. So he was like, forget 77 punk. He was brushing up against that stuff in the early days of punk rock in the Lower East Side with CBGB and through his aunt and everything else. Now, before we get into Stimulators and stuff, if perhaps we should catch up with John Joseph a little bit.
There was, I would say there is, with the CRO-MAGS, and not to disrespect anyone else, I think the three main personalities are Harley Flanagan, John Joseph, and Paris Mayhew.
Paris Mayhew, which I'll tell you right now, I don't know much about Paris Mayhew's biography because he's not the kind of guy who would write about that. I know one crucial thing in the band is he did not come from the kind of background John and Harley did. He was from the Upper West Side of New York City, more middle-class family, pretty well-behaved guy, not a guy getting into a lot of fights and shit, which we'll talk about the fighting in a bit because it's impossible. Harley's book, it's like every other paragraph there's a tangent about a fight he got into. It's really hard to believe. John Joseph had a really tough upbringing. Probably all the shitty things about Harley's upbringing without any of the upsides and more shitty things. His father was a boxer who abused their mother. That sort of came to a head, and he got taken away, put into foster care with his brothers. They moved kids around a bit back then, so he had like one kind of shitty foster family that fed them quote-unquote hash that he thinks was just Alpo dog food. Then he had a family that was nice, and then he had one that I think made a big impact on him. They're called the Valentes. They were these Italians from Long Island who effectively used him and his brothers as slave labor. They had to live on a patio outside the house. They weren't allowed in the house. They were out back with their dog, their husky, that was constantly chained to a tree, never let it off its leash. They were literally like malnourished. They were fucking starving. They had to eat. The story that really stuck with me is he says in the mornings, because the mother, and this is really perverse, the mother, she liked the cookies on Oreos, but not the cream. So she would.
First off, just someone
fucked.
saying that
Fucked.
you are a psychopath. We're dealing with a lunatic
You
here.
should be locked up, yeah. She would scrape the cream off with her teeth, spit it out, and put it on moldy Wonder Bread and feed it to John and his brothers for breakfast. He said he ate Oreo spit sandwiches for years.
Which, just that alone, if nothing else happened, that alone is, like, insane. Like,
Deeply
Probably enough to
imagine.
turn you into a crazy person. Like just
yes, yes.
most people would I think break a lot of people.
Yeah. And, I mean, he talks about stealing the dog's milk bones, when they're starving, they ain't half bad, shit like that. And the dad had some construction job he would bring them to and make them work for him. Really horrific shit. The clothes they had to steal from Salvation Army. I mean, this family was taking the money from the state that they got for having foster kids, keeping that money, and spending zero money on feeding them or taking care of them. They also had several shitty biological kids, the brothers of whom abused John Joseph and his brothers sexually. Eventually, his older brother Eugene showed up. He had gotten to stay somewhere else for a while, and he improved things because he was, according to John, he later became like a Wall Street guy. Their older brother was like a born hustler. He knew how to fucking finesse people. He would suck up to these foster parents so that he could be the good kid, and they'd let him pick whatever kind of cereal that he wanted. That was your reward if you worked harder than everybody. And he used that to figure out where they kept the money, and they started stealing money from the parents and ripping off other kids in school. Around this time, John starts having sort of his early flashes of being violent because, he had watched his mom get beat up and he felt helpless, and that feeling of powerless tends to make people very violent. Got into it. Some kids at school started making fun of him because he had a, rotten salami sandwich on moldy bread every day for lunch, which he eventually ended up just eating in the morning so kids wouldn't see it. He beat the shit out of that kid, beat up some of his brothers. So, rough time there. That foster family, he tried to, blow them into the school principal. He, got in trouble at school and was going to try and tell them. He told the principal. Principal's horrified, but the dad showed up and was like, and I'm sure shit like this still happens all the time, Dad's like, oh, he tells lies because of the trauma he had as a child. That didn't happen. So,
Damn, that's fucked up.
yeah. Around 7th grade, I think he dropped out of school and ran away, which is around the same time that Harley, meanwhile, in the Lower East Side,
Dropped out
is
too,
posed
right?
along, and he dropped out in 7th grade. Less dramatic, wasn't like escaping trauma at home or anything. He just ran away because his mom, I think, didn't really care if he stayed or go that much anyway. So, you have both these guys out on the streets in various capacities by, 7th grade. Harley's book, I didn't get that deep into, his experiences on the Lower East Side. Then he did have these artist connections and stuff. John's shit in the evolution of a Cro-Magnon from that period is crazy. He went to Coney Island, and big theme in John Joseph's life that I think is relevant if you look at him now is he's a fucking hustler. He talks about in that book, if you want to learn how to make money, do it the way I did. I was 12 and I didn't do drugs, but I hung out with junkies because they knew how to come up with money. So he talks about being in Coney Island with these junkies 10 years older than him and making fake acid to sell at Genesis concerts and robbing weed dealers and all this shit while being homeless on Coney Island in the winter and shit. So big point he keeps making is if you're forced to know how to survive, you'll eat fucking dog biscuits and steal from people. You will figure it out no matter where you come from. And again, big theme in Mr. Joseph's life, I believe.
So let's get to, when do they meet? I mean, they must have.
They met, if I recall correctly, in 1980 or 81
Okay.
at a, I swear they met in D.C. at a Bad Brains show.
Really?
Because I think, because John Joseph joined the Navy, as a lot of fuck-ups did and still do, where he also met Rabies from Warzone. They were both deployed or stationed in Virginia, not far from D.C. John Joseph had gotten into punk somehow. I think while he was still in New York, saw the Bad Brains. They blew him away. He made friends with them and became their roadie. And I believe that's how Harley met him, was through those means. Now, Harley, it's worth mentioning, when he was 13, late 70s, early 80s, he started playing in his Aunt Denise, who was like 30, her early punk band, the Stimulators, which a lot of early hardcore guys would go see them because they were a little bit faster than the other bands in New York. Stimulators also formed a relationship with Bad Brains. They'd trade shows or whatever. So Harley is playing drums in a punk band.
So he's drumming.
He's drumming.
That's crazy.
He's originally a drummer. You can hear him drumming on their single they did. Pivotal moment was when Stimulators went to Ireland to play back in the late 70s when Ireland was a fucking war zone, and Harley encountered skinheads for the first time because there were none of them in America. But he met these guys and immediately grabbed them because he was like, these are punk rockers you can't fuck with. You know, in his school, he had been the only white kid who the black kids would hang out with, according to him, because he was fucking crazy. They could sick him on people. He was like, no one would fuck with him.
He's the crazy white boy.
He is the crazy white boy. Yeah.
I don't know if it's Chappelle who's got the.
He was the prototype.
He's got the. You got every crew got to have the white boy. See, that dude's crazy. So why would we be hanging out with them?
Yeah, that was Harley Flanagan, but in the punk scene, he was one of the only people who was like that in America or in New York. It was all these older druggy people. He goes to Ireland and meets this whole people who dressed a little bit tougher who were the same way. And one of these skinhead guy who was roadie for an Irish band called the Outcasts gave him like a Ben Sherman shirt and shaved his head. And as soon as he came back to New York, that Eric Casanova dude started dressing the same way. And the skinhead thing started blowing up in New York around like 1981, just, person by person after that.
Damn, that's crazy. Plays it, leaves home, plays drums in a band when he's 13, 14. And then they happen to just fucking play Ireland, which is insane to think about. And makes this out of all the people he could have ran into, which, I mean, makes sense they would run into skinheads around that time, too. And, by chance, he is, like, literally the arbiter. I don't know if it's the right. He is the first one.
He's the chosen one. He also mentions Ireland is where he learned the trick where you can put a cue ball in a pool sock in a sock and the sock has a little give, so you can swing it really effectively like a nunchuck, as he describes it.
Is that a trick?
It's a cool feature, I guess you could say.
Socks have this bonus feature where you can also put a pool cue in them.
Now,
or a pool cue. Yeah, a whole
cue
pool
ball.
A pool ball in it.
Like it's a really long sock.
It's not just for feet, folks.
Now, a lot of people know about the Ireland thing because it brought the skinhead thing to New York. What not as many people know about is after Harley came back from Ireland, he like hitchhiked or like train hopped to California and hung out at the Vats in Northern California, met some crazy fucking drug addicts there. Believe had a confrontation with Mike Muir of Suicidal Tendencies when he was in Southern California, which later when Suicidal Tendencies played CBGB, you can guess what happened. And I think saw like Circle Jerks in some of those bands too in like 1981, which is notable because DC, Teen Idols went to play in LA around like 1982, right? And that was when the Teen Idols, you listen to the Teen Idols demo, it's very mid-tempo. They go to LA, they come back, they're playing 3 times as fast. Prior to Bad Brains even, or around the same time, that super fast style of hardcore, like New York City wasn't doing that. The people that were doing that were, I guess, the Bad Brains starting to, and then in LA, like both the music had gotten faster and more aggressive. We're getting out of punk and into hardcore, and crucially, the super violent slam dancing, like when Harley and as well as those guys from DC separately first went to LA and saw what those kids were doing at punk shows. They had never seen anything like it before in their lives. And I think for both of them it was a big inspiration. After that, Harley he met some punk girl from Canada and like snuck into Canada. They turned him away at the border and he hopped a fence and made it to Montreal. That part of the book was really fucked up. But pretty interesting. He talks about he made friends with these 2 skinhead guys named Yob and Orbit, I believe were their names.
Hey, yo, Yob.
Yeah. They were like, again, this is like 81. These guys were like satanic Nazi skinheads. They lived in some squat or loft that they had painted everything totally black, but there were pictures of Hitler everywhere and like a huge pentagram on the wall. And like fucked up guys, even by the standard of those kind of guys. And he compares it repeatedly to the Clockwork Orange because they would sit around and take psychedelics all day. They would trip and they like you're in the Milk Bar in Clockwork Orange, and they would spar and stretch, and then every night they'd go out and beat the shit out of random people, more or less, or jump gay people. So guys who are very into random violence, big time. And around that same time, Harley got really into Discharge because those guys loved hear nothing, see nothing, say nothing. They didn't pay attention to the stuff about peace and anarchy. They just would be cheering like, "The nightmare continues, the blood runs red," and like, it's like Sakevi. Everybody said he got the Crass records and was just like, "Yes, violence, cool." So similar kind of guys.
No, you're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yes. So there's some real scary stories in there about Yob and Orbit beating the fuck out of people and Harley getting involved and scary shit. They were huffing a lot of glue and taking a lot of acid and Discharge, Venom, and I think I could be remembering this wrong. I think that was when he heard Black Sabbath for the first time or got into them. He tells a story.
Reality, right?
Yeah, he tells a story about hearing Master of Reality, and when Children of the Grave comes on, he said he was tripping and he could see like barbarians with horns on their helmets coming out of the speakers and killing villagers. So I think those three bands I just mentioned and the Bad Brains and Motorhead, which is another one that he was getting into around that time, really where the CRO-MAGS sound starts, I think, is from like Discharge, Motorhead, Venom, and then the Bad Brains, which we can get into the Bad Brains stuff again more in a second.
Well, and getting into the influences there, which listening to the demo for Age of Quarrel and Age of Quarrel, I think it's pretty clear that you can hear at least definitely with the bass tone, definitely Motorhead and Venom.
Yeah.
Absolutely, especially on Before the Quarrel, the demo.
Which is how it was supposed to sound. I have a tattoo on my arm of the one song that's on the Before the Quarrel demo and not on Age of Quarrel. Everybody's Gonna Die is the name of the song. And that was one that he wrote when he was living in that place with the skinheads in Montreal, which is telling.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. I can see the two. The especially Motorhead influence, I think it's pretty apparent with how like kind of driving that early stuff is. The later stuff is missing that, unfortunately. And it kind of comes back with some of their other later stuff, but like post Age of Quarrel, it's kind of missing that driving, bulldozery kind of.
Definitely more into the
more groove.
Like I would say even more like Judas Priest style.
He mentions when he talks about Best Wishes in that book, he says Judas Priest was a huge influence.
Does he?
I can hear that too.
No, that driving sound with early CRO-MAGS as well as Motorhead, and I would mention Discharge too. I don't know how I could not talk about it because violence was such a big part of their lives. The feeling you get when you hear that is a bit like the feeling you get when like a confrontation's about to happen, when your fucking adrenaline's going and your blood is pumping and you're like, "Come on, let's fucking do it." That's how it makes you feel, and that's why that stuff is so fucking sick.
Yeah, I think they're able to kind of channel their the interactions and the conflicts they've had really well into their characters kind of into those recordings.
Yeah,
to
for
those
sure.
songs.
At least
that's the magic of it.
I'd say at least for like the first album,
The first couple,
because they definitely. Seems they got that out of their system pretty quickly, it seems.
I think
they also put a lot of drugs in their system.
That is also that will definitely take that away from them, yeah.
A big thing that is important to notice with the other albums is that they've never really had a consistent lineup that did like more than one like album, I believe. So that really kind of makes a difference because, you could have a lot of the team players there, but eliminating one, especially when you've made such an influential record as Age of Quarrel, like.
Well, I was gonna say right because that was with Paris and Mackie as well too, right?
Yeah.
Probably,
and Harley.
But I mean, like as far as that was like the lineup for them.
Yeah, it was the Age of Quarrel is the lineup, and then you kind of move things around, things change.
Like add new members.
New members, their influences, and like their tenure with the band, like, with Beth Witheth.
Beth wishes.
You have Harley singing, and like it or not, while yes, he did a good. I think he does a good job on that. Like it's not the same, and even with the Age of Quarrel, and we'll talk a little bit about that more in a second. There's some things that could have been better about it that I think kind of makes it an interesting.
Well, Harley even said that himself in his book. I've heard him say it elsewhere. He never wanted the original lineup of CRO-MAGS, or not the original lineup, the classic lineup to break up because he knew it wasn't the same, and he knew that their chemistry was a secret of it, which is something he'll cop to that I don't know if the rest of them will. I've never heard them say that. I don't think they want to give him his due, probably. And he sounds like he can be a huge asshole, but still.
I mean, it sounds like he's giving them their due, too.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, it's like, hey, well, these motherfuckers, not saying he's called them motherfuckers. Without these guys, just getting some mail. Without these guys, like, we're not the same band.
I will note, too, just as a quick side note, one thing I was struck by in Harley's book is with regards to the drugs, a lot of LSD. Not a drug you associate with the punk scene, really, but
no.
He was,
especially with New York hardcore, too.
Yeah, I mean, Dust was big, too.
Yeah.
Rabies was like a big Dust head, I guess, until he became straight edge. But Harley doing a lot of acid, and I think that might have been, some of the X factor that led to this band being what they would become.
Well, let's talk about the first album, Age of Quarrel. It's widely considered to be as a classic amongst New York hardcore.
And hardcore in
general,
large,
yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think it deserves that spot.
Definitely.
Hey, folks, Tyler Hammer here. Wanted to talk to you about one of our sponsors, Shirley Road Records. Established in 2017, they range in a variety of sounds from hardcore punk, power violence, to more esoteric sounds like industrial, harsh noise, gore noise even. There's something there that'll tickle your fancy. And if you go to ShirleyRoadRecords.com, you can check out what they have in stock. Not only do they carry stuff from what they release, they carry stuff from labels like To Live a Lie Records, Vehicular Homicide Productions, No Time Records, and Faith and Failure Productions. Hey, that's my label. Go to ShirleyRoadRecords.com and use promo code KOPPOD10 to get 10% off your order. That's COPPOD10 to get 10% off your order. You can also listen to the music that Shirley Road Records has put out at shirleyroadrecords.bandcamp.com. So check it out. Pick up something you've heard of, something you like. Pick up something you never heard before. Treat yourself today. Get a little surprise in. You'll thank me. All right. Peace, guys.
Do you mind if we do a little bit of the background on that album, because it's still
for sure. Yeah,
that's like 6 years after. That's the thing. That's why the record is so powerful, despite some of its flaws, is because this is not just like, oh, these four guys got together, they wrote some really good songs and made it. Like, there is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in this fucking thing. So I think the CRO-MAGS really became. He had the idea for a band, I think, before he went on his little trip cross country. It was actually, originally the name came up, it was him and Mugger from the Black Flag roadie from Nig Heist.
Yep.
They were fucking around trying to come up with band names, and CRO-MAGS was, I think, actually Mugger's band name suggestion. But Harley comes back to New York. He's trying to get a lineup together. He's got that Eric Casanova dude was going to sing. That was the original singer from the CRO-MAGS. They're putting up CRO-MAGS graffiti. They meet Paris Mayhew. Eric knew him. He was like a good kid from the other side of town, but he liked hardcore. But he also, in Eric Casanova's words roughly, like, he could play fucking Rush and shit. And, like, Harley didn't like Rush, which was a good sign, because what he was struggling with, and I have come to kind of understand this, is it was hard in the punk scene to find people who were good musicians. Like, the idea of playing punk, but, like, playing it really well and being a good musician, like, Bad Brains were doing that, and they were a huge influence on all this in more ways than one. But if you're just hanging around the scene, finding people who could actually play was a struggle. So they hopped on that and got Paris to play guitar. bunch of lineup changes. Eventually, Eric Casanova leaves. John Bloodclot, the CRO-MAGS or the Bad Brains roadie who had returned to New York, becomes the singer. They recruit Mackie Jason, a guy who I really haven't been able to find that much info on, other than he did graffiti and was like a fan of jazz fusion and hip hop in addition to punk. He just recruited from this band Frontline.
You can definitely hear in his playing.
Yes, yes. So that band comes together. That lineup starts to come together like 1982 and 1983. Now, to talk about this shit at all in that album, I mean, even the title of the album, Age of Quarrel, that's short for the Iron Age of Quarrel and Hypocrisy, which is derived from the Hindu scriptures. So we have to talk about the fucking Hare Krishnas, because around this time, John Joseph had done several stunts with the Hare Krishna Temple. For those who don't know, that is a religious organization, some would say a cult, founded by a guy whose name I can't pronounce, that was around in the like 60s and 70s. Their beliefs are not that outlandish. They venerate some of the Hindu texts, specifically the Bhagavad Gita, which you'll hear references to in CRO-MAGS lyrics and shit. They're big on the idea that we are trapped in this cycle of samsara where we are reincarnated into our material forms, and the goal is to leave the material world behind and become one with the supreme Godhead and one with Vishnu. So that's what their religious beliefs are.
Not that crazy.
No, it's not that crazy. The organization itself was kind of sketchy. John Joseph, I mean, he got involved with it because they had free food. And also he credits the Bad Brains a lot with introducing him to like the idea of spirituality, because they were in their early days of Rastafarianism. And if you're someone who's just surrounded by drugs and debauchery and violence, that can be very appealing to you. He has a really funny story about he had broken his leg somehow. He was AWOL from the Navy when this was happening, by the way. He just left. They had him, his leg was broken, and it was Christmas time, and they wanted to go beg for money, because that's how they got money, was asking for donations. They put him in a wheelchair when he was dressed up as Santa, and he was supposed to be retarded wheelchair Santa, and he would just hassle families for money, and they'd give it to him to get him away from their kids. And then he'd hop out of the chair, hop in the Krishna van, and they'd make off like bandits. So, again, skilled hustler. He, much like how Harley was the first fucking skinhead guy on the scene, the Krishna thing, which later got really out of control, that came from John Joseph. He introduced that to the scene, and people thought he was crazy at first, but over the course of a few years, Harley ended up gradually embracing it too. He became a vegetarian first, and the way Harley put it was like the guys on the scene who had the worst reputations, like the guys who beat up the most people, did the most drugs, were the most dangerous, were the first to get into Krishna consciousness, which makes sense because they probably had started to have their fill and wanted the idea of leaving the material world was probably somewhat appealing.
Yeah, I can imagine that, having some sort of spiritual escape after having to deal with so much conflict.
And still dealing with it. I mean, this same period of time they were living, John and Harley lived in some squat with no running water and no electricity. They had to shit in paper bags and fucking bathe in fire hydrants, like rough shit. Everything you hear on fucking Age of Quarrel, and especially on that demo, that is what you're hearing, is an existence that I can't even imagine.
So, with Age of Quarrel,
the demo was recorded, I think, 84. And it started making
came
big.
out 85, I think.
Yeah.
It wasn't really released, right?
With a little bit different artwork too.
Oh yes.
Almost, which would be also considered problematic.
Well, they wanted to use that artwork for the real full length. That's what got nixed. So by the time we're approaching the mid '80s, like the skinhead thing in New York is huge. That was like a really was catching on to the point where it's like Harley's like, I don't know who these fucking kids are. He complains a lot about New Jacks who didn't know their way around, and especially people who heard he got into the Krishna thing and thought he went soft, and he corrected them very quickly. I'm not going to get into repeating his anecdotes too much. There is a story pre-Krishna days right after he got back from Montreal where he remembers putting 19 people in the ICU in one night, which is, even he's like, that was crazy that I did that. That's unbelievable. But Yeah, so the skinhead thing, because of them and Agnostic Front, is really taking off in New York. They're already getting a bad rap from Maximum Rock and Roll. It's interesting hearing him talk about it because he correctly says that like that was big in New York, but also it was ethnically probably the most diverse punk scene in the country. And those things kind of coexisted. There was like this black skinhead chick from D.C. who I've heard stories about from other people named Lefty, who wore like swastikas and shit and was really scary, but she was black. There's a great story about our friend Bobby Ebbs from the band Genocide from New Jersey going on a Nazi rant and at A7 in New York and getting beaten up very badly. But Harley's like, yeah, but I was beating him with my swastika belt buckle. So important for context, I would say, like, these people were all on fucking drugs and living crazy existences, and I think trying to assess their political views based on or based on anything is probably fucking stupid. Also, Harley was under 18 at this point. He was a teenager, and they were all wrapped their minds on
we
drugs.
Don't really, as teenagers, usually our minds are a little scattered in terms of political and social ideas sometimes.
Yeah, let alone if you're in the Lower East Side having to go to war with whatever Puerto Rican gangs and other random people and you're smoking PCP.
Yeah.
But MRR started like sort of because people would hear about fights and stuff, and this is before the internet, so the only way anyone knew anything about the scene was either from seeing it firsthand or reading it in MRR. So New York hardcore is already getting a bad rap, and you could probably, if you don't want to blame MRR, blame Harley Flanagan and John Joseph and their friends for that, pretty much entirely. So
I mean, you're either going to hear the best of a place or the worst of a place, and you know, if you have a lot of bad shit kind of going on that most people consider bad compared to other scenes, then I mean, yeah, that's gonna kind of pop out of the page.
There's definitely a lot of gay bashing happening too. You know, shit you would expect.
It's the '80s, folks. It's AIDS. AIDS is around.
If AIDS don't get you, then the warheads will, to quote the song World Peace by the CRO-MAGS.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
geez.
But they become like sort of the leading band of this milieu in New York, or them and Agnostic Front, and they get this manager, Chris Williamson, who by all accounts is, you know, a hustler like John Joseph, but probably better at it. I don't know about that. That's a tall order, but
he's just probably older than them.
Yes, and he had a label called Rock Hotel Records and booked shit and invites them to go to a nice studio and record the LP Age of Quarrel, which I know was released in 1986. Might have been recorded before that, although
it was recorded in '85.
Recorded in '85. That checks out.
There is so in the Wonder Woman '84 movie, which is the second Wonder Woman movie, there's a scene where there's a person wearing an Age of Quarrel shirt, and John Joseph says, like, people were like, this is bullshit. I think Justified Arrogance was like, yeah, it's fucking bullshit, because this didn't come out until '86. So, whoa, technically it was recorded in '84, so it's like, if it literally didn't come out in '86, how the fuck did anyone fucking know about that? Never mind, make a fucking T-shirt with that artwork on it.
I was gonna say it would have been different artwork then. It would have been the one where it had
LP
like the
artwork, not the demo.
The original
artwork.
LP artwork is like, it's a drawing of a punk shooting dope, and above his head there's like a drawing of a mushroom cloud, and in the cloud is all the evils of the world as Krishnas would represent it.
Which includes two men also,
two
like
men
holding hands.
Two men holding hands. People gambling around a dog fight.
Yeah.
They also seem very anti-abortion. The CRO-MAGS guys.
Well, yeah, Krishna consciousness was very big on that for, you know, whatever religious reasons they have.
At the very least, like, not to dog on John Joseph, but like, I understand where I kind of understand where John Joseph is coming from. It's like, well, technically people would have known about like the CRO-MAGS around this time. I agree. I understand that. However,
I thought you were saying, I understand what he's saying.
I understand what he's saying, good, but someone literally wearing a CRO-MAGS Age of Quarrel shirt makes no fucking sense. There is 50,000 other fucking bands you could have a fucking punk, you know, shirt of.
Right, they could have had an Antidote
It doesn't have to be. Yeah, it could literally be an Antidote shirt. That
would have made
way
sense.
more fucking sense.
I thought you were going to go in a different direction and be like, look, I understand what John Joseph is saying, like two men holding hands. I hate to see it too.
I hate it too,
but
folks.
It's a little
I
dated.
hate walking up the street and seeing a dog fight with people just throwing their money down.
Throwing money, and there's no one even taking it. But I understand where John Joseph's coming from. Not trying to dog on John Joseph at all. I respect him as a musician, as a
front man,
a forerunner in creating a sound and scene that is very important to a lot of people, and it's super influential. Like he is super influential, regardless of what you think. But yeah, I think that's a little side note.
Another note that is important that a lot of people, I think, even I sometimes forget, but is important. Prior to recording the LP, but after the demo, Doug Holland of the group Kraut, the guitar player, left Kraut and joined the CRO-MAGS. So that's why that record has 2 guitars on it. Harley said Doug would always come up to them after shows and be like, man, you guys are great, but you need a lead guitarist. And finally, Harley was like, all right, asshole, you keep telling me that you want to play lead guitar. And he was like, yeah, sure. So he joined and did that. So that sort of, I definitely think, helped them get more of that metal sound, intentionally or not.
And so you pointed out, too, that John Joseph was sick during the recording. So
bunch of problems with the recording.
Bunch of problems with the recording. With a lot of great records, I will say, especially during this time, like the mid and early 80s, they're like reading about some of the records that come out during this time. I've definitely read a lot about how there was issues, like things weren't exactly what we wanted. Going to a studio that has no idea what the fuck they're doing. Like I hear that still somehow produces amazing fucking records. I think that's why sometimes throwing, young people, all you young people, even people our age, throwing money at something does not necessitate or eventually lead to a good product.
Well,
Working with what you have sometimes is maybe a better thing.
They also had, but also there's the flip side of that is sometimes you'll regret not being a perfectionist because their manager, Williamson, was like pressing them to get the album done. He had some kind of timeline for them. So they cut some corners. They should have waited for John to not be sick anymore. His vocals do sound better on the demo, in my opinion. And a huge one that I think is a tragedy in the hardcore punk world, Harley's bass amp blew on the first day of recording. Now, he had previously been he had like a Guild semi-hollow body bass, and he used, I think, a Marshall guitar amp, which is why he had that Lemmy tone that is like my favorite bass tone I've ever heard. Amp blew. He wanted to get a new amp. Chris Williamson says, no, don't worry about it. Just do a DI, direct input, because they recorded it live. You can overdub later, or we can reamp that signal, which they didn't do. So you're just hearing a dry DI of Harley's bass on Age of Coral, which sucks because the tone on the demo is so good.
I will say it's not that bad, though.
Could be worse.
It could be a lot worse. I still like it because his bass. I still think his playing is very good.
It is good, although he says that he was underplaying because he was not on good footing. His bass didn't sound the way he was used to. And
me personally, I think I definitely prefer the more raw and organic sound of the demo compared to the. I feel like those songs they just don't. They sound like less intense and aggressive with like that more polished studio sound. I think.
You know what?
Like doesn't hit as hard.
I think if they got that polished studio sound, but with the good bass tone and the good vocals, they could have found a good middle ground. But that's not what happened. And tragically, the demo I would probably say I prefer, but it doesn't include the song "We Gotta Know" or "Seekers of the Truth," which are some of the best songs. "We Gotta Know." Legendary. If for some reason you've never listened to Age of Coral, go listen to it now. That's legendary opening for a record.
Sign of the Times. Love that song. That's a good one.
That's a great one. That is on the demo too. But yeah, it's that intro. We Gotta Know the
I mean, one of the most classic intros.
It's interesting in Harley's book. He says he was trying to do a sort of Neanderthal version of something he learned from jazz fusion because he had gotten some of that music through the Bad Brains. I guess there's a thing in jazz where you play a very simple chord progression and you fill it out with drum fills, which is what Mackie Jason did on that track. His fucking drumming on it's awesome. So some issues with recording the record, but it's definitely a stone cold classic. Could definitely see where metalheads could get into it.
Dude, yeah, songs like Malfunction, I think, are... And like the slower songs are... Normally, because their faster, shorter stuff is sick, but like it is, the songwriting on that is varied, enough to where like how long is it? Like almost 30 minutes or so.
Yeah.
A little under 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's like a half hour about.
It doesn't feel at all rushed. Like there's a lot of stuff kind of that they work with. You know, I think it's a very varied, but like, and that's why I think it's so good. Is because even when they change it up with like a slower tempo song, it doesn't feel like corny. It doesn't feel like they gotta try and change it up. It just feels like this is what CRO-MAGS sounds like.
You can. I think the fact that Harley was super into Sabbath probably helped them with that. A little bit.
Yeah, you can absolutely kind of hear that.
Him and Paris Mayhew wrote most of that stuff, both lyrics and music. John Joseph did write some lyrics. Harley, to his credit, he's always very specific. He's like, we all kind of wrote those songs. I couldn't have written them without the presence of these guys. But as Paris Mayhew, I believe, enthusiastically points out, him and Harley wrote most of the actual riffs, and most of the lyrics. So, I saw the John Joseph lineup of the CRO-MAGS where it's him and Mackie and some random string section. It's like, that was fun, but you didn't really write this music, so it's a bit like a tribute band, even though you're the original singer.
So after they record Age of Quarrel,
yep,
they put that out.
Rock Hotel Records, yeah.
And now, so this must be around the time then, or like maybe a year after that, where they get the offer to go on tour with Motorhead and GBH.
Well, I think it was first GBH and then Motorhead with GBH on some dates, maybe.
Okay.
But I'm not. Well, no. It was GBH and then some dates with both in the U.S. and then a tour with Motorhead in Europe. So
now, real quick, do we know how like the general reception was of the time for this record? Was it well received upon a release?
Definitely very popular.
Okay.
Especially with people who liked like the early New York hardcore stuff. It got some play with metalheads too. They talk about Metallica giving them props and stuff like that.
That's cool.
There were criticisms of it as well.
To be expected, I would say.
Yeah.
Probably mostly, I'd say, also from the MRR crowd. Definitely some lyrics on there.
Maybe a Kerrang! Because I remember reading a bunch of reviews from Kerrang! About like Voivod and like Slayer.
Just like shading.
They're just like shading on them. Dude,
I believe CRO-MAGS did some dates with Voivod around this time.
Oh, really?
Too.
That makes there's that picture where one of them's wearing a Voivod shirt. I believe I just saw.
Yeah, I think John has it on. Yeah,
I gotta say, slight tangent. Voivod, that band is so underrated, and that because I fucking love that band. The first like 7 albums, they just pumped out material. Like
I gotta put that on my queue because
they
I haven't
are
gotten into that band
way
yet.
more hardcore and punk than you would ever expect, and I think, especially with how some of their songs are, very similar to kind of how like some of the CRO-MAGS songs are.
Oh, nice. But yeah, I don't know. The album, I mean, they had sort of a bad reputation for violence and some of their, I won't even say right wing because it wasn't really political. I would say reactionary views, partially because of their religious shit. And because of, by 86, the skinhead thing, we'll just say for purposes of brevity, had started to take an ugly turn in some parts of the country.
Yeah.
And in the world, which the CRO-MAGS guys, I think, didn't really account for or understand yet. Harley was just like, who the fuck are these new kids?
Seems like they definitely backed away from the skinhead.
Eventually, yeah.
It is important for listeners to know, and that don't know, and that like Nazi skins and violent skins were a real big thing. Literally the reason why the first Negative Approach lineup kind of broke up after recording their LP is because they're just like, we can't stand like playing a show and everyone just being violent for like no reason.
Yeah, and you can trace that back to literally to Harley Flanagan, and I don't think anyone should necessarily hold that against
Harley,
him. But
Harley, it's okay.
You
We're
hate to
sorry.
see it.
We
And again,
I'm
he was-
hardening you.
he was a little kid, but that is where it came from.
Who would have
and
thought?
yeah.
Who would have thought shaving your head would be so innocent? Something so innocent as shaving your head.
Yeah.
That turned into something so violent.
Yeah, the album included, that was on Sign of Times, it's looking around, don't like what I see, corruption and faggots all around me. Like that, ruffled some feathers. But very popular album, great album, and started getting them a lot more attention than I'm sure they had bargained for, culminating in initially. I mean, even GBH was a big break because that was one of the only punk bands that could tour overseas. They were big enough because some metalheads were into them too. And
Yeah, you kind
also,
of need
yeah.
that bigger crossover appeal. Not in like the literal crossover sense, but like in that sense with like GBH, metalheads liking them. I guess that kind of does formulate the idea of crossover music.
They did some dates with Venom, too. There's a great story that I think says a lot about the reception to this band, where they're playing, I think, somewhere in the Midwest, and the paper had billed them, or I swear they had announced her at the show. They had, like, a guy who talked on the PA was like, the CRO-MAGS, skinheads gone heavy metal mad. And the crowd was mostly metal guys at that show, and they start chanting, what the fuck? Skinheads suck. And they're all pissed. They're like, even the CRO-MAGS guys are like, oh, what the fuck? Like, this is going to suck. What are they going to do?
Yeah, I'm sure they're like,
yeah.
Immediate reception to hearing skinheads are playing. They're like, this could potentially maybe turn violent, and or like these are kind of like the people we don't fuck with.
Well, at the shows where it was mostly CRO-MAGS fans, it did turn violent. You got a lot of mixed peoples at crowds that got dangerous. This one, I guess, was mostly metal guys.
Okay.
And then Harley's bass isn't working, so it's more tension. He gets Kronos' bass. And he said by the time they finished We Gotta Know, all those metal guys were just, their jaws were dropped because they couldn't believe how good it was and how impressed they were by it. Now, Mackie Jason, the drummer from Age of Coral, had left by this point, I think because he saw that Chris Williamson was fucking them around. I think he got asked to play in Bad Brains. So they got Petey Hines from Murphy's Law to play drums on all these tours following the Age of Coral album release. So this band is ascendant at this point. One thing I just want to note biographically that I think is important to understand this band, like the John Joseph was like, and by this point Harley too, were real deep into this Krishna thing to the point where they're like trying to recruit people and stuff. John had like joined the Krishna temple and ran away several times because they weren't big. He wasn't supposed to play music because it's the material world, whatever, blah blah blah. So he would run away from the temple, but he still believed the stuff. And they'd send their like secret service after him, weird shit, but. The whole time, he's still like, Harley has a story about when Harley was like 15, so this was earlier in the 80s. John's older by like 5 years at least, and he had him like, they were at the temple like doing Krishna shit, and then he's like, all right, we're going to rob weed dealers with these fake guns we have, or that he had. So that shit was also going on. It went on when they were on tour. They're still broke when they go on tour. Williamson's getting whatever money it was, and it wasn't that much money. So they're going ape shit shoplifting from places. There's a story, they had a tour driver who was like a guy they knew who was a vegetarian Krishna guy but stayed up all night, went to a McDonald's and said that he saw Jesus in the Golden Arches and became a Christian.
So the guy just quit like on him like that, like in the middle of a tour?
No, he stayed with them, but he was too crazy, and they had to get him in Chicago checked into a mental hospital and get a new driver.
That is a wholly American, I think, phenomenon, is being a different religion and going into a McDonald's, seeing Jesus within the Golden Arches, and then converting.
That's it.
I think he literally said Jesus told him to get a Big Mac, and he stopped being vegetarian. So already, like, it's the typical rock and roll thing, and I've seen this with Rochester bands before. I've experienced it. They put out this great album. They're getting a lot of traction, and, you know, getting to a point where, like, oh, we can get away from our sort of fucked up lives with this band, and then shit gets worse.
They're thrust into a new environment, and
in a music video.
It wasn't like a, especially with something like this, there isn't like a slow build up to where it is. I mean, there kind of is, but it's over the course of years and years and years prior to even before they were the CRO-MAGS. And it's just like this, it's kind of this like reaction. This fucking thing goes off.
You could say, and I'm sure they would likely say, that it was karma.
Maybe. Shit, I might be a Christian by the time we're done with
yeah,
this.
So basically, the tour finishes, the CRO-MAGS tour finishes with like doing all the dates with GBH and Venom and Motorhead. And what? John Joseph does some math and figures out that Harley was stealing?
A little more to it than that. What ended up happening was they went to Europe to do more dates with Motorhead, if I'm not mistaken.
Uh-huh.
And at the end of that tour, Doug Holland from Crouch stole Chris Williamson's wallet, their manager.
Okay.
Now, according to Harley, all he showed him was a couple $100 in there from the show or something, and they split up that money, and it was a big joke. John Joseph says he's not sure what happened, what really happened, according to, and I don't know what Mayhew says about this, but apparently, nor have I heard Doug Holland's word on it. Apparently, it wasn't just a couple $100s; it was thousands of dollars from the whole tour.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
John says Harley took all of it. Harley says Doug Holland took most of it, gave him a couple $100. Regardless, like Harley after the tour, fucked off with whatever money he got, went and visited some relatives of his in Denmark. He spent some time in Denmark as a little kid. And everybody else went back to New York, and John Joseph quit and didn't see him again. They didn't see each other again until they ran into each other on the Lower East Side, like in 1987 or something. What's up, hoes? I'm kidding. Most of you aren't hoes. About 77% of you are men. I know. It's called analytics, bitch. I've seen that shit. Of course I did. I'm trying to do some serious marketing onto all of you. But right at the moment, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just sharing information with you in a way that's friendly, relatable, and warm. And personable. So as a friend and a brand, I want to talk to you about Syrup Head Recordings. This is a label that I'm sure you've heard of. They're an institution. They've got a wide array of brutal and extreme music, ranging from hardcore punk all the way to harsh noise and a whole lot of various forms of gore in between. And next Friday, he has 3 new cassettes coming out. He has a bunch of things coming down the pipeline. I'm not sure what he's going to drop next. There's a few different things that are queued up. There's the False Gods cassette, which is sludge, doom with hardcore influence. Swarm, which I've mentioned before, completely batshit crazy Japanese band. 16, that's a wild mince gore band. Maggot Vomit Afterbirth, which Tyler's nodding his head. He says that's good stuff. I assume it sounds like what you would think it would. And the Hit and Run Drivers, which is a hilarious band name. Mince gore. If that's not your bag, plenty of other stuff there. So go check out syruphead.storeenvy.com and syrup_head_recordings on Instagram. Nice to talk to all of you. Bye.
Jeez.
Wow.
And that's where we get into the next sort of era of the CRO-MAGS.
I mean, could you call it the metal era?
I would say
Yeah.
so, because the metal
Yeah.
and this kind of stuff is way more apparent. Like with Age of Quarrel, like to me, I guess you could say it's crossover in like how it is, but
Well, I think I like the Motorhead Venom comparison because
Yeah.
you can you can definitely hear like that.
You can hear
the
Discharge
nice-
too,
and
but
the thing-
Discharge was inspired by those bands too.
and the thing with that is that those aren't those are kind of crossover bands in a way too, because they do have like a punk
Yeah.
kind of, you know.
Motorhead was like the one band, and like in England this was like a big deal, but it eventually was here too. That was the one band, like when metalheads and punks fucking hated each other, which they did for a long time, they did both like Motorhead.
I both like Motorhead.
Lemmy was friends with metal guys and punk guys.
Yeah.
He was friends with like Gay Advert and people from the punk scene.
So we have 87, John Joseph leaves, and then
He leaves and starts smoking crack.
does
lot.
he? Oh,
Yes.
geez.
Gets very into smoking
Well,
crack.
glad
I
he
mean, these
doesn't
guys
anymore.
These guys never really got sober at any point in this. Once they got deeper into the Krishna thing and their band got a little bigger, they I think chilled out a little on the drugs,
Yeah.
but just a little bit. They were still fucking doing drugs and shit
Dabbling here and there.
while
possibly.
talking about keeping their bodies pure and vegetarianism
But
and whatever the fuck else.
keep our bodies pure, but also smoke crack.
Yeah, so he gets really into smoking crack. Harley, I think, isn't sure what to do. He's getting very into metal at this point. Again, I know you mentioned Judas Priest in particular he was big on. So in, I think, 89 was when Best Wishes came
Yes.
out. But they would have been touring and working on songs prior to that. Him, Paris Mayhew, not sure who else. Who was the drummer? It was a different guy drumming.
I gotta be honest. I have no idea.
They had a sort of revolving door at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, Tim, you want to look all this stuff up?
Yeah, I'll
hold on.
find it.
But he's working on new music with Paris. Long songs, some slow songs, very, very metal sounding. You guys know metal better than I do. What does Best Wishes sound like metal-wise? Is it like
Let
Metallica
me-
kind of?
I
No,
mean,
let me
I
look at
don't.
my
It's
notes
not.
here.
I don't think it's that thrashy. It is definitely. It's more on like the heavy metal end of the spectrum.
Yeah,
I think.
they're kind of off. They're kind of doing this weird. They do this weird thing because 89. That was like, I don't want to say that's peak thrash. It's kind of when thrash was on like the down downswing because like glam and stuff
It's like
that.
proto grunge era, actually.
Proto grunge.
Also, the lineup for Best Wishes, Harley, Doug Holland, Paris, and Pete Hines.
Oh, so Petey Hines from
Like, he stuck
Murphy's
around,
Law
yeah.
stayed in
Okay.
the band, and Doug Holland stayed around. Okay,
First,
that makes sense.
The first thing I have for Best Wishes is that I do like the production. This Sound of a Time, I do like that kind of metal like production that they kind of have. Like everything sounds pretty good. I'm not thrown off by his Harley's vocals. I don't think they're that bad. But when he he sings,
I don't know. I kind of even like that.
really,
There's
I think I prefer John
character.
Joseph
There's
singing.
character to those vocals.
yeah. At the very least, we know it's I think coming from a place of authenticity, and I think
Right. He's not like
they have to do
Yeah.
something different. Like it's like
Apparently, when John Joseph tried to sing like that, it was even worse. But
Oh.
when we
Well, I
talk
could
about Alpha Omega,
tot-
we can get into that.
oh, okay.
I don't think either of them could quite pull it off. But I would have said, why didn't they just get a new singer? Like, I don't know. It's already not the CRO-MAGS.
Maybe
John Joseph is gone.
they
Like,
probably just. I feel like Harley, if anything, was probably just like I don't want to
I'll
like.
do it.
pay
Yeah.
Yeah, like why like have to like look for
He-
another
he,
person.
He also had, and I think he talks about this in the book. By that point, he had a reputation for being a fucking nightmare, and people didn't want to work with him.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say
Well-
for Best Wishes.
Yeah.
Honestly, I really didn't care for it that much. I thought it was like really. It's only a half hour long, but it like
Feels a little
it
longer
really
than that.
dragged to me.
It's boring. There's a lot of long songs.
Best song,
Yeah.
easily Down but Not Out. For being
Yeah,
like that's like the one like super. That's like the thrashier song. on
Yeah,
the
that's definitely the best one. I think most people agree on that. When they go Thrasher, it's better. I'll
Oh,
also
I was gonna
note
say
that
my favorite song probably "Crushed the Demoniac."
that's a good one too.
Death Camps is also good. My big issue, and I think all of us probably say the same thing: songs are just a little too long.
Crush the
Yeah.
Demoniac is actually one that they wrote when John Joseph was still in the band. They played it on like the Age of Quarrel tours.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I wonder
that's an
how it
older
was
one.
received back then, considering they were playing like mixing that probably in with their Age of Quarrel songs. I think if you mix it in with stuff like that, it would be fine. There's also a band called Crush the Demoniac, newer band, I believe. They play Best Wishes era kind of CRO-MAGS stuff. Do pretty well. I remember hearing it on demo.
I would also note, like lyrically and aesthetically, the Krishna thing it's kind of subtle on Age of Quarrel. If you're not looking for it, you won't catch it. On Breast Wishes, it's like
thrust
a
right
pit-
in, thrust
yeah,
right
Well,
in
they-
his face.
it's a picture of Vishnu on the
Yeah,
cover.
the
I think,
cover alone is just
and like the lyrics are pretty unapologetically dealing with that, Hindu stuff.
Is that cultural appropriation coming from a bunch of white guys?
No, I don't think so because it's coming from a. I think it's coming from a place of authenticity from them too.
Absolutely, yeah,
because
they were practicing.
They weren't. It would. You know what? It would be if they had just gotten into it. But they were embroiled, probably
for
embroiled in that
years,
for
yeah.
years.
Also, Hinduism isn't like a folk religion. It's not like they're doing like indigenous Native American spirituality. I mean, if you actually want to, we won't go on a big tangent about this, but those Hindu texts, the Hindu beliefs are based on the Vedic texts, which are originally Indo-European or Indo-Aryan. Varg rejects this theory and says that his people came from where he grew up since forever. That's
From up north.
from up north. The other theory that some geneticists have is that Indo-Europeans, which would include quote-unquote white people of all kinds, migrated from like east,
Right, like
Uh-huh.
India.
and conquered a bunch of people and became, settled in Europe or whatever. I don't, I'm not an expert on it, but I do know like that Hinduism is rooted in texts that go back to way back then. It's a very, very old religion. And I can see too, like, why someone who was surrounded by this kind of nihilism and degradation like these guys would embrace it. I mean, when they talk about the Age of Quarrel, you read about it, it's a kind of a resonant concept because it's like, yeah, there's 4 stages of humanity, and the first one is like a golden age, everything's fucking great, and then over the course of thousands of years it degrades, and then the last stage is the Iron Age of Quarrel and Hypocrisy, when everything's super fucked up and shitty. And unfortunately, if that's true, we got a long ways to go. It's thousands of years. But at the end of that, the cycle begins again, and everything is great, and everybody's at peace, and everyone. It's a process of growing further away from God, leaving oneness behind, which is interesting when you see that repeated in so many religions, and even in like communism in a weird way. But yeah, so that album that's super in your face. I think, if I recall correctly, I don't think this band technically broke up, but they had a lot of lineup changes.
They might have just been in like limbo for a while.
They were in limbo. There were lineup changes after that. Doug Holland and Petey Hines. Actually, I don't know if he left.
Doug Holland stayed. I think Paris quit.
Paris quit.
Or let me check real quick. Are we talking for Alpha Omega?
Yeah, around that era, because this is where the metal thing
Yeah,
really takes over.
Because in Alpha and Omega, it's
Yeah, there's no Paris.
Paris does not
on,
play on
the,
that, but I believe
one.
he
That is what
contributed
happened,
to
yeah.
the writing of Alpha and Omega.
So he left, and there's some guy named Rob. Harley got like straight up metal guys to play in this band, and he said it was a problem because when they go on tour, like, yeah, there were metalheads who'd come to see them. You know, they'd play with Biohazard, Typo Negative, or whatever, kind of bands of a similar lineage, actually. But a lot of old CRO-MAGS fans would show up too, fucking like the new generation of hardcore people. Some of which Harley liked, some of which, particularly in New York, he had a lot of disdain for. Not to his credit, Harley not a fan of the crew thing. Really hated when that became.
He's
a
always
thing.
in his classic hit song NYHCLESOG. He says he's
Great
like
song.
He says he's like I don't fuck with like that crew shit.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's I will agree with him. That shit is kind of fucking dumb.
yeah.
My hardcore crew, like when post the 90s, like post the 80s, I should say, like hardcore is a completely different thing. It is its own fucking thing. Like the early 80s, like the idea of like hardcore, it's like you could also call those bands punk, and that would be fine. But now you couldn't call like a CRO-MAGS a punk band for the most part. I'm sure they might even think. I'm sure a lot of bands are kind of like this. They might necessarily, not even necessarily agree with that. They might be like, yeah, we're like a punk band. I see that all the time where bands like that are clearly a different genre. Like, yeah, we're a X band. That's not that.
So looking at Alpha Omega, it says everything written on there was by, Harley, Paris, and that guy Rob you're talking about, Rob
Buckley, yeah. So, yeah, and the hardcore thing changing, that again, I think you can trace to the CRO-MAGS, because a lot of it, aesthetically and even musically, you get this like hip-hop influence.
And you hear that a lot in Alpha and Omega.
You do. And you hear it before that, though. I mean, some of those beats Mackie plays on the first album, and even Harley talks about when they would play in the early days with Eric Casanova, and he would be like b-boying, like breakdancing on stage because he was a Puerto Rican kid.
Sick.
Also, side note, since we talked about Antidote, there was also in the early days of the CRO-MAGS a band called MOI. There's a Mode of Ignorance, which is another fucking Krishna thing. There's a video of them on YouTube. That's Harley on drums, Nunzio from Antidote playing bass. I think Paris playing guitar, and might have been somebody else on guitar, and then John Joseph singing.
Oh, really?
And John Bloodclot, he started getting called that around the same time because he fucking was in a band called Bloodclot, and that's like a Rasta thing. Harley says all those New York hardcore guys started saying it. They were talking like fucking Jamaicans by 1982,
really?
like Bloodclot, Firebird.
Oh, that's like really early too.
So
like
funny,
early
yeah,
80s,
'cause
they're
they
talking like
loved-
that.
They loved the Bad Brains. Difficult to overstate how much that changed heavy music when the Bad Brains moved from D.C. to New York.
Oh, they probably
Nothing
fucking
was the
ran
same
that
after
town.
Oh, I bet.
Nothing was the same out there because New York didn't have like hardcore music like that yet. It wasn't like L.A. Everything was still like more rock and roll. But by the 90s, Alpha Omega era, Harley is in the difficult position of wanting to play like heavy metal music, but having a good portion of his fan base be hardcore guys and also like skinheads, which were increasingly not a group of people that he would want anything to do with. And then John Joseph rejoins the band, which is something that the label put together because they thought that the kids would like it.
It's what the kids want.
And he, in Harley's book, he talks. Now, John's book doesn't. It like ends with it. There's a big gap. He's like, "Oh, I smoked crack and then I stopped, and now I'm an inspirational speaker and a vegan, and I'm going on Joe Rogan and all this other shit." Harley deals with all of it in his book. He characterizes John Joseph, Mr. Bloodclot, there as a guy who kind of gets excited about the latest trend and wants to hop on it. Either it's genuine excitement or it's just that hustler's mindset again. And, circa Alpha Omega, what was that, 92, 93?
92.
Or 93.
93?
Yeah,
Yeah, 92. After birth.
yeah, near-death experience.
Near-death
is
experience, 93.
So rap was really big. and grunge was really big, and John Joseph was very
And
excited about grunge.
alt metal, like alternate metal.
Yeah,
or
like
Yes.
Faith
White
No More,
Zombie,
Rage Against the
Faith No
Machine.
More, Rage Against the Machine. Yeah, that kind of stuff. That does incorporate the rap kind of influences that you hear a lot in New York hardcore.
See, I don't think with this record, I don't think there was as much grunge influence. Definitely
No.
more of the, like alt rock kind of stuff.
Alt rock, alt metal,
Near Death Experience, on the other hand, that does have
more rap.
Well,
more grunge.
something
more
I
grunge.
learned.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had never really listened to Near Death Experience. Harley says it's terrible. I listened to it. He's mostly right. Another thing I learned is Near Death Experience is just outtakes from the Alpha Omega sessions. So and yeah, there's a song you played on it that sounds like they're trying to be Alice in Chains.
Yeah, Time I Am, where it's straight up
Yeah.
is like it's Harley doing like the Lane Staley style like
Well,
vocal.
I was saying to you earlier that I was listening to that song Victims. I was listening to Alpha and Omega, that song Victims, and it sounds, the intro where John Joseph is singing very much sounds like Faith No More. Like that is something Faith No More would have done. And it makes sense because Faith No More was a huge band at that time.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, because that was right around when their album Angel Dust came out,
Yeah.
which was like I think that was like a pretty big hit.
I think so.
The weirdest song that they put out in this Near Death Experience Alpha Omega time period, easily that War on the Streets track, where it is like it straight up sounds like it's like Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith.
Yeah.
It's like where
It's
did
not-
this come
It's
from?
not bad. I
I like
the
the song too. Yeah.
Another thing that, and I didn't, when I was younger and I was just listening to all these records and didn't know that much about the band, I wasn't aware of this. But the plan for this album, when John Joseph joined, is they wanted to be like Deep Purple and have him and Harley both do vocals and trade off.
For Alpha.
Yeah, and for those songs too. Now, according to Harley's book, and I find this believable, no disrespect intended, they got in the studio and John Joseph couldn't pull it off. The parts, because he had started getting into all this rock music and rap and shit, and he wanted to do the like vocal ad-libs, the oohs and ahs and all that kind of, and hitting high notes and shit, and he couldn't do it. It was fucking horrible.
Well, I could totally believe
Yeah.
that.
So they cut most of it, and Harley ended up singing those parts, which he didn't do perfectly, but apparently as bad as some of that sounds, or as goofy as it
Right.
sounds,
Wasn't worse than John Joseph.
yeah. And John Joseph quit the band because this decision to not have that many of his vocals on the record, he took that as Harley personally dissing him. Harley is insistent that every single person in the studio told him,
Yeah, this is not gonna work.
yeah, we have to get rid of most of John's vocals because they're terrible.
Another funny bad song around this is the song Near Death Experience, where it sounds like heavy Pearl Jam. It's like,
yeah,
what?
they were
what?
trying to get on that wave, I guess. I also,
It's one of those things where it's like, might as well just do something. Let's write a song like this. I mean, maybe kind of catches people's ears, and maybe we get more popular.
Think about it too. It was '93. I mean,
You would be.
that was like a big year for
It would be a
grunge.
mistake for CRO-MAGS to have just made Age of Quarrel Part 2 after Age of Quarrel. I think creatively. I'm not saying that like.
Oh right, people
I-
probably would have just been like, "Oh, like they already did an album like this."
Yeah, like hang it up.
yeah.
Nowadays, yes, that's what we wanted. That's what we want to hear. But also, it's like, how can you even replicate that? How can you go from there?
Can't.
Like, it's kind of hard to like.
That's the one
And I'm
thing I
sure
appreciate.
I'm sure there was a bunch of bands. Sorry, to cut you off.
ahead,
I'm sure
go
there's a bunch of bands that kind of took that and like ran with it from there after that came out.
I do appreciate Harley's honesty when he talks about this, because rather than saying like, "Yep, my band that's been around forever has always been just as good and I'm perfectly happy with it," he's like, "No, dude, there's never going to be anything like that classic lineup of the CRO-MAGS. I wish we could get back together, but we can't for these personal reasons. It sucks." Now, regards to what I think of these albums, Near Death Experience, boring, weird, terrible, reason that those songs were outtakes. Alpha Omega, I would say, is their second best record. I actually really like that
Oh,
album.
easily. That is easily their best. Because Best Wishes is just like it's like bland and pretty.
I think
It's boring.
I think if you took
There's more personality
Alpha,
with
I think if you
Alpha
took the
Omega.
best songs from both of them, you'd have a great album.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like there's an Alpha Omega untitled track, and it just sounds like a bunch of stupid bullshit.
Oh, it's like a jam, yeah.
Why? And then there's the the jam at the end. I believe it's like
That's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's like something
Oh,
called
that's
untitled
changes,
track. There's
right?
something
Like
called-
the 11-minute song.
Yeah, 12-minute song. There's an untitled track that's like the third to last, and it literally is just bullshit. I don't even know what's happening. It's like, why is this on here? Just get rid of it. Doesn't need to be on the album. Doesn't do anything.
Harley mentions that one. He's like, I enjoyed playing that, but I don't know why it was on the album. For good ones on that album, the song "Other Side of Madness" is like a long metal ballad that kicks ass with there's some terrible vocal ad libs, but they're fun.
That's a great song, though.
It is a great song for sure.
Another one, my personal favorite, easily "Eyes of Tomorrow"
Yes.
with like the good John Joseph rap over it.
Goddamn, alarms are ringing in my head. Wake up, world, all to the wild dead. Look around, see the hate and the greed. Like I know the things of people dying in here. Wake up, world, things are getting serious. I'm looking at the future and it don't look good for us.
Such a good CRO-MAGS song.
That's like, I personally,
Nuclear
I would
power
say that
plants,
is
right?
like probably one of their top songs. Like that is like easily one of their best.
I'm like tempted to say the same because as the years have gone on, I like it more and more. The rapping part kind of works for some reason.
See, it is. I think they absolutely pulled it up. Like just
Yeah.
because they do like the rap section, like at the beginning, they go into like a fast, like heavy thrash section with Harley singing, and then they go back for like a short another little rap verse.
Yeah, I wish the whole record was more like that. I'll say this for the CRO-MAGS though, even on the records that aren't very good, Harley and Paris know how to write a fucking riff. Like
Yeah.
even on the songs that aren't very good, the riffs are at least pretty good. Like there at no point am I listening to records I'm like, and this happens to me a lot where I'm like, ooh, that's a really stupid guitar riff. Like they are riff machines, and Harley's output since then, with some exceptions, mostly shows that.
I think
So-
and Paris has a solo thing where he doesn't have a singer.
Oh,
Fortunately,
I haven't heard that.
yeah, I heard it's pretty good. Like I remember listening to a song. It's like these are good riffs. Wish there was a singer on this, but I think as someone pointed out, it's like, given that guy's track record with vocalists, can you blame him for not having a singer?
He seems like go ahead, Tim.
No, I mean if you had something.
I was just gonna say, Paris. We haven't talked about that much because he, like I said, I don't think he has a book about himself or anything like these other.
He keeps his
motherfuckers
nose
do.
clean.
He sounds like he wasn't deep into drugs and shit, but he sounds like kind of a fucking nightmare to deal with too. He just sounds, and Harley talks about this. He said he was always super cool until the '90s. He got really stuck up hanging out with these metal guys and shit. And I think started to embrace his sort of rich kid roots of thinking he was better than everyone.
Yeah.
He's mostly stayed out of the drama with these other guys, but it seems like in his own right, a pretty difficult. So you have the three main guys are all fucking difficult to deal with in their own ways.
Yeah.
And I was going to say, wrapping up this near-death experience, Alpha Omega era, clearly a very tumultuous time for the band. With, I think, because for the rest of the 90s, they didn't put any more albums out, and I think there was just a bunch of lineup changes for the next.
There was a reunion at CBGB's in the early 2000s, but then John and Harley had some other beef. There's also an EP that I've only listened to once before. I got to revisit it. That Harley and Paris did one under the name White Devil, or like around Alpha Omega era.
really?
That I'd be curious to hear. Yeah, definitely weird, some sketchy shit. Their best wishes. Ian Stewart Donaldson is thanked in the liner notes. I don't know what's up with that. Harley is disavowed. A lot of, I don't think Harley Flanagan's a Nazi. I think that's absurd.
I think,
I don't know
again,
what his
it's
deal
like,
is.
he was just on a lot of drugs at that time.
Yes, which got worse after Alpha Omega and near-death experience era. In his book, he says
that's not a good excuse.
Okay.
it's not a good excuse, but
I mean, I
is
guess
what
it
fucking
really
is.
isn't, I suppose, yeah.
Guy was also still pretty fucking young at this point. Even what, 20s?
Yeah.
Yeah, he
20s,
would have,
late
like
20s?
probably 25, 26, yeah.
So after Alpha Omega, and I didn't know about this until I read his book. This is when he got really into coke. He had always done all kinds of drugs. He's still doing psychedelics all the fucking time. Angel Dust was around. John Joseph in pre-CRO-MAGS era had gone to prison because his friend who was named Computer, had him running around selling Angel Dust to people. But after Alpha Omega, Harley gets really into drugs and also into like groupies, and he's fucking a lot of loose women, and it's a lot of debauchery.
So he was like, he had got the drugs and rock and roll part for a while. Now he was like getting into the sex, drugs.
Yeah,
rock
and I
roll.
think less into the rock and roll.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
John Joseph at this
Bump up the
point,
sax, turn on the rock and roll. Now we got it.
I don't know if he's talked about it, but I think mid-'90s John Joseph was on heroin because in that New York hardcore documentary from '96, which we should also do an episode about, there's an interview with him where he's like, look, folks, I've done some things in my life. I've been around people who were doing things. He was acting like he was on heroin. Regardless, he's not involved with the CRO-MAGS. Harley is going off the deep end with cocaine and these women and whatever. But around this same time, if I believe he becomes acquainted with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think he credits that to a large extent with turning his life around. Which ultimately also I think enabled him to make the album Revenge with Paris Mayhew, which is a fucking weird one to say the least. I think Tim listened to it the most.
I
so
listened
maybe you
to
guys
it
some insight on
today.
this.
I will say, it is. I saw it written as reviewed as a return to form, and I wouldn't
No.
necessarily agree, but I wouldn't absolutely disagree because they do kind of go play fast again with shorter songs.
I just wouldn't call it a return to form just based on how, like, I feel like with that record, it's like, okay, fast thrash song, next song, pop punk song.
Yeah,
like,
they do.
after it, and then it just like keeps alternating like that.
Yeah, they do. They have more of a melodic punk and hardcore edge to it. The second song, I forgot what it's called.
Jones.
Jones. I heard that it started playing, and I was like, this doesn't feel like pop punk. It feels more like
Melodic hardcore, is that?
Misfits. And some of the stuff does remind me of more like melodic punk, which I guess you could say is really important to pop punk. Very similar formula, so I get that. I don't think they're necessarily doing
Especially-
pop punk, but I think Misfits, especially considering that maybe I'm assuming that, were they friends with Danzig at all?
They knew him. I think they were on good
Probably on
terms
good
with them.
terms with them, I can imagine. And with Misfits being maybe that was around the time when they were kind of
That was
revival.
3 years after their comeback
Their
album
comeback,
came
I
out.
The guy
think
who
that
played,
kind of like sound was like, I could see them being like, yeah, this is kind of cool. This
The
isn't
drummer from Misfits, Googie, who played on Walk Among Us, became a Krishna too. And yeah, the sound you're describing, very similar to what much more devout Krishna's Shelter, featuring Ray and Porcel from Youth of Today. They were definitely doing the songs you're talking about on Revenge. That's like what Shelter sounded like.
which
by
is
the
those
mid-
melodic
band I-
ones.
do not fucking like. And
I like the
I
first
will-
Shelter one.
I will say this is almost unrelated to CRO-MAGS, but I guess tangentially related. The amount of stuff that's related to hardcore that gets the hardcore like thumbs up approval, i.e. like the Shelter stuff like that, sucks to me so bad. Like, I don't get it.
We talk about like 108 and like
Yeah, not even
Another
108.
Krishna band
I think I like 108 a little more than Shelter.
that's named after the on the prayer beads, which I actually have a set of, the mala. It's 108 beads, and you chant, touch each bead and chant a mantra every time. So you chant it 108 times.
I'm not even talking about the Krishna thing. It's just like the tangential hardcore shit. You know what? You don't really
or like
spurred this thought on.
H2O.
Similar Bane. That band Bane. Other than that band,
Bane.
that band fucking sucks. That band is.
I don't think
is
I've ever
an
listened to
emo
that band before.
That band is. It is like, I guess it's like post-hardcore, straight edge kind of hardcore stuff, the early stuff. But like, man, I don't know. That shit is like, reminds me of like the worst aspects of like hardcore and like metalcore. Not necessarily saying they're metalcore, but like you know how some metalcore songs will be like completely all over the place. There's like no hooks or anything like that. Hardcore.
Oh, it's like the
90s
random
hardcore stuff that
Yeah.
does that a lot too.
Yeah,
Cannot
I don't like that.
fucking stand that, and that's like, to me, the downfall.
almost
of
like the
hardcore-
Converge kind of.
Yeah.
That's when you move away from punk and you don't have the like Ramones style songwriting
Yeah,
anymore. Which I think anybody who knows my taste at all knows that I like things that are written like pop songs typically. I will say Bane, I haven't listened to that much because I always thought they were boring when I did. Would not say they sound like an emo band. I think they sound like
They sound like an emo band in
whatever
that
hardcore
they
band.
sound super fucking whiny
and that they suck.
and that they suck.
Would they be classed as like melodic hardcore? There's melodic hardcore.
They
I
are.
like.
They are. I would say, if I'm going to be, I'm not joking, and we're more melodic hardcore. You know, maybe a little bit of post-hardcore kind of influence.
'Cause I like
But I think
some
that's
of that
where
stuff.
that kind of comes from. The post-hardcore, like, era of like we're bridging ourselves or like challenging ourselves to do something that's a little bit different.
See,
And I'm not opposed to that, but like with the songwriting, it's like, man, there is literally nothing here for me to fucking grit my fucking teeth into.
See, I like the bands that did that and added epic guitar melodies. Like I like Champion a lot. That band's good.
I like an epic guitar
Carry On
melody,
is good.
but, you know,
Have Heart I still like.
I will say I'm not going to say what I want to say. You know, it depends.
It's
on
not
what,
good,
it's not
folks.
good. Depends on what kind of epic melodies we're talking about.
The first Shelter album's cool. That's
I just very weird tangent, but it's just like, man, some of the stuff that gets kind of like this pass, it's like this shit kind of sucks, and I feel like hardcore people like that stuff because it's being like, I don't like just hardcore. I like stuff like this.
Like,
and
I
they're
like this thing
singing.
that's like hardcore, but like a little
wouldn't
bit
even-
But it's
different.
really kind of just hardcore that sucks.
I wouldn't even go that far. I think they like it because those bands had cool long sleeves.
Right.
Maybe.
It's for an even more shallow reason.
It's
You're right.
aesthetic, yeah.
And I mean, Bane is a cool name too. I was you
Not
know,
really.
I think it's cool. Like the character, the Batman villain.
See,
Bane,
that just makes me think of that, and that for me, that's
he's
just like, oh, game
he's-
over.
Bane
Like, that's
is
crap.
fucking badass. And then it's like, this is the band that I think of, and it's like, well, this sucks. Like, this isn't like a fucking crazy South American, like, not a war criminal, a warlord who fucking is super fucking jacked and, like, breaks Batman's back. I just think of a guy, wimp crying. Same thing with that band Shai Hulud. Shai Hulud, the sandworms from Dune, humongous, enormous creatures that will destroy anything.
And then the
you
band,
hear- the
one of the
band
most annoying things I've
literally
ever heard
one
in
of
my
the most
life.
annoying
I
things.
think did you guys show that to me and I like fucking hated it?
Yeah, it
Am
was
I mistaken?
terrible.
Yeah.
Band's so
When I
bad.
saw you talking shit about Bane on the internet, it just led to me. I looked them up. Same thing that always happens. Looked it up, got bored, went to related artists, saw like Champion and Have Heart. I was like, I'm just gonna listen to that instead.
Yeah, I
'cause
don't-
I like that.
I don't
more.
know. No, not trying to diss Bane, but fuck, I think your band kind of sucks.
Do you like Modern Life is War?
No,
Have you heard that
I
band?
don't think I have.
That's like pretty much in the same vein,
Same-
though, isn't it?
No, dude, it's. I don't think it is. I don't know how all this shit is classified. That's like modern hardcore that is different musically, but that is really good.
Okay,
'cause the
you know what?
songwriting's good
I'll give it a
and the
shot.
lyrics are good. Listen, I think they have a split with Dangers that's really good.
That is
but,
a band name that I
Dangers is also great.
feel like I haven't heard, like seen mentioned in like 16 years.
Dude, when I was in high school, that and the Dangers record, and I think they had a split together. Like, all my friends who mostly listen to more punk stuff were like, yeah, for that new stuff that sucks, like, this stuff is good. In part because the lyrics were good. But anyway, the tangent, it's okay tangent.
So,
It's a good
Getting
one.
back to
'Cause
Revenge.
none of this would exist if it wasn't for CRO-MAGS.
Yeah,
that's a
that's
fact.
true. That's
Yeah.
also true. And I think CRO-MAGS, those songs we were talking about kind of fit in with like what we're talking about to a degree. But more, they have that more stripped down rock punk approach.
Yeah.
And also,
I don't. I will say I don't hate them. Like,
No, it's not terrible.
there is
little-
a song on Revenge where Harley does a Phil Anselmo impression.
Oh, really?
First song.
the first song.
He's definitely like doing the Anselmo.
There's definitely
vibe.
mutual respect with those two. I mean, he thinks Dimebag is one of the sickest guitar players, which Dimebag is a really sick guitar player. And, yeah, him and Anselmo, like, gave each other prop. I think there's a quote in Harley's book from when he met Anselmo, and Phil's like, feel like you and me are like long-lost brothers, man.
We're long lost brothers, brother.
I
I
can
could
see
have
him
never,
saying
I
that.
would have never thought to do what I do if you didn't do what you did first. I'm
Brother.
not doing his voice right. His voice is more fucked up. Than it's like,
You were close.
I feel like we're like long-lost brothers, Harley, man.
I'm the kid.
Yo, it's weird. And maybe revealing. Harley, if you listen to him talk, he does not have a New York accent. Now, in contrast, again, I've listened to John Joseph's audiobook a bunch of times, and he sounds like a cartoon character. I got my degree from the University of the Street. That's in editing. We have to. There's a part of his audiobook we have to add at the beginning.
we
You
can
got to
do that
hear it.
maybe.
It's amazing. But after that,
Well, there was that one EP that Harley put out as Harley's War with that song
Yes.
NYHCLESOG.
that one
What is
is
this?
that's 2001 or
Oh, really?
2.
That came out like 2008 or something, I think.
Really? I
Yeah.
thought it was earlier than that because that's with like people from the business and like an all-star lineup. And the only song I know from it is NYHCLESOG, which Tim referenced, which sounds like Godsmack. And except unlike Godsmack, it is kind of good. And you have to watch the music video for it immediately.
It does feature Harley also. Like the verses are rap.
The verses are fully rapped. The music video has like he's posting text messages he got, like their reviews. One of which is just Roger Mirrett, like, that's hardcore, man. Stigma loved it. He said he was there.
And then, like,
Referring to
also
the video shoot.
Stephen Blush, from the guy who did American Hardcore, being
yes.
yeah, that's sick. Peace, yo. And it's like, what makes me think it's like a text message. He's like, oh, we got to meet up sometime. It's like, why would you include that in the video?
At the end of the video, there's a quote from Renzo Gracie, which, again, Harley, I'm telling you, for guys like this, like you talked about John Joseph being addicted to adrenaline. If you're that kind of guy, at the very least, do strength training, probably do martial arts, because it saved this dude's life. It saved other people's lives, because you get to get that thrill without fucking hurting anyone. And
I think you should just read a book.
You do that too. Yeah.
Yeah, watch Netflix.
Drink some Soylent.
Yeah.
Have you seen the new Spoderman? No, and Harley even talks about like meeting the BJJ guys after, a life of violence and being around really tough people. And another great Harley Universe character, this guy Bags, who bit off a guy's thumb at CBGB's and went to prison. Spent his whole life around those people, but then he met these BJJ guys, and he was like, these guys are actually tough. Like, all those people I knew, they could fuck them up, and these guys aren't psychos. They're, like, very calm and collected for the most part, and I think that appealed to him, and he got really into that and got off drugs for the most part, and it was really good for him. And the fact that he's friends with the Gracies, who literally created Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is pretty amazing. That is makes sense looking at it now, but wouldn't have seen it coming back then, I don't think.
I think another incident that we should bring up is the Webster Hall, 2012 Webster Hall incident.
Yes, because John Joseph, I think, after whatever the fuck he was doing, got off drugs.
Brought his own version of the CRO-MAGS back.
Brought his own version of the mags back with Mackie. Got on his, like, self-help kick, wrote a book called Meat is for Pussies, which I unfortunately own a copy of, and was briefly a vegetarian because I read it. And I was freshly off drugs and trying to make sense of some things, just started working out. Funny book. He's on his self-improvement kick. He's talking about, spiritual stuff kind of, but not being explicitly Christian. Again, good hustle. Guy's got a good shtick going.
See, that kind of thing, that just makes me, like, I feel that makes me view Harley as, like, cooler than John Joseph being on some, like, oh yeah, here's like my wacky scam now, or like, it's like,
well, yeah,
it's not genuine.
Because JJ will tell you himself that he's a hustler. He talks about it all the time in his book. Some of the most interesting shit in his book is learning to fucking hustle and survive and scam people and all this shit. And it's like,
but for at that point in his life, it's like, dude, do you like really need to be doing that?
I don't want to say that his health, the way he views his diet and health and stuff like that, isn't genuine. But I do think it is funny. There's that one video where he's talking about making the smoothie, and it's got a lot of not crazy ingredients. A lot of ingredients that it's like, let's be honest, man. A lot of people, A, can afford this, and B, don't have the time to fucking do this. Like, this is a lot of fucking way more effort than, like, cooking a meal.
Well, that's why I do respect his shtick, because he's selling that to, middle class and rich people who can't do that.
You know what? If it makes you happy and helps you, good on you, I guess.
He's got shit he believes in, and he now has learned that there are people he can sell it to, and I guess good for him. But I will say, once you become that guy, when you become the scammer, the hustler, whatever, even after you've made it, I think it's hard to turn that off.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Especially if you're doing it when you're like a prepubescent
right,
kid
like
he was. It's like, how are you going to stop,
it's just how his brain, like, this is how he thinks. It's how he, like, interacts and goes.
Yeah,
wired.
How he's wired. No diss.
Not entirely by choice, you get wired that way.
But anyway.
There was a big reunion show at Webster Hall in, I believe, 2012 with the John Joseph CRO-MAGS, and I think Sick of It All was playing. And Harley, per his account, wasn't interested in going, but Stephen Blush and some other people told him he should, and even told him he should bring his bass just in case he can play a few songs with them. So I'm going to give you his version of events and then the version of events that was very publicized at the time, courtesy of John Joseph and the DMS, Doc Martin Skinheads, Drugs, Money, the New York hardcore crew. You probably know who DMS is. The version those guys have, I'll give afterwards. So Harley says he showed up with I think he had his bass with him. Maybe he didn't. I don't think he brought his bass, but he showed up, managed to get backstage somehow, tried to like talk to John and them in a friendly way, and he says, to quote he has a solo record from 2016 called CRO-MAGS, which is great, by the way. The album rules. It's like a D-beat record, but every song is about this stabbing incident. To quote that
song
record,
it is too.
yes, there's a song called Guilty Until Proven Innocent. And he says, quote, "It was a setup. It was a setup. Somebody set me up. A room full of punk-ass bitches tried to do it. I fucked them up, and now they want to sue me."
The song, I mean, you can't forget the great song, "I'm Stabbing Someone" right now.
That's most of my favorite songs I heard in
Yeah.
2021 were basically that.
I'm gonna
actually.
stab you.
I'm gonna
Make
stab
sure.
the song. I'm gonna stab you. The song, "I Have a Knife" right now.
Our best of 2021 playlist will be out soon, and I'm some of my favorite UK drill tracks. Just a couple will be on
I mean,
there,
that was.
but
I mean, sure, that was a big influence on that stuff. They're like,
Harley Flanagan,
"Oh
yeah,
yeah,
gotta
what?
be.
What is mate?
He knifed him up.
Harley Flanagan.
Something about the year 2012. A lot of stabbings going on. Here.
Harley CRO-MAGS on
Harley
Batman
Flanagan.
ting.
That was also the year Negative Approach, Cali Brewhouse here in Rochester.
Ooh,
Hey, the man them
Classic.
stabbed up Harley.
classic.
Or no, Harley stabbed up one of the Mandem, actually. He,
Right, Harley
Alright, so
didn't
yeah,
get
let's
stabbed.
get back to the
his
story.
version of events was that they've tried to jump him, and he stabbed. Just happened to be the current bass player of the CRO-MAGS, a guy who, I don't think we have to boop this. I believe the guy's name was Jimmy the Gook was the name he went by, but
I mean, if that's what the guy's fucking name is, I don't know.
we're not gonna boop it.
I'm not
But
pooping shit.
he
Was
the
he?
version of events from the other side was that Harley ran back there like a maniac and just stabbed the dude. I'm sure the truth is somewhere between the two. Was he super diplomatic when he went back there and talked to them? Probably not. Do I think Harley Flanagan, a grown-ass man with kids, despite his history, would run up in there just
Like
trying to
stabbing
bore this
You
guy
know,
up?
like-
No, of course not.
I think especially at that age, that point in time for him, he would probably know better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think that.
I don't
that
think
doesn't
he cares
make
that much
sense.
either, because he already had I'm sure, I know, and he'd say himself he misses the CRO-MAGS and he wants to get the classic lineup together, but he had a life, he has kids, he has a woman, he has this BJJ shit, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu instructor, wasn't going to do that. So again, truth I'm sure is somewhere between the two, but it was a big deal, it was on the news.
Also, why would he try and fight? Like, I'm gonna take on a room full of people myself. Even if
Room
he
full of
isn't even if
DMS
he is
people, too.
like,
He's done shit like that a lot in his youth, but why would he do it now?
why would he do
Yeah.
it now? Like, I mean, I guess I can see him like possibly being able to pull it off, but it's like, dude, like I'm older, like he's older, he's got responsibilities, he's got like a youth. When you're a youth, you could be kind of like that wrecking ball. As an older
Yeah.
man, an older person in general, like you kind of don't, you kind of have to contain yourself a little bit. I would say.
Yeah, that story doesn't make any sense. So I guess I would have to go Team Harley a little bit on this one. Although it also doesn't necessarily make sense that they would set him up. That's kind of weird too. But
Yeah, why would they do
I
that?
don't know,
I guess why would
there's,
they do that
you know,
at their show?
I guess as revenge for whatever other beef him and John Joseph had before that. I really don't understand it. Again, probably a little bit of both, but they didn't press charges because those guys, of course, don't want to fuck with cops more than they have to. And
Maybe they also
Harley, yeah,
were like, "Oh, we can't because we are in the wrong." Like
it's probably a mixed bag. But that was like the last encounter between him and JJ or anybody. Since then, in more recent news, John Joseph toured with Mackie and Jimmy the Boop and whoever for years, and like other people from the DMS crew in a band that was calling itself the CRO-MAGS that I've seen twice. They're fun, but recently, after many legal proceedings, Harley won the rights to the name CRO-MAGS. Again, his last solo album, he had to just entitle it CRO-MAGS because he couldn't release it under that name. Paris Mayhew is not involved in any of this. He was involved in the litigation, but recently Harley won the rights to that name, so now the other lineup has to call themselves like CRO-MAGS JM, and they tour a little bit, I think, or play shows from time to time. John Joseph, I think, makes enough money making smoothies on Vice now that he doesn't have to really do it.
Yeah.
Harley, so there is a new CRO-MAGS album, which I've only heard. I heard a preview track that I liked. I listened to some more stuff and didn't like so much, but that is an all Harley project.
So the
what
new
I'm
one
saying.
is
You
all
listened to it.
Harley.
Yeah,
Okay.
that just came out
That
last
sounded
year, right?
It sounded fine. I listened to a few tracks of it. Sounded fine. Sounded kind of like a little in between Alpha and Omega and like Revenge, where like there wasn't like mildly longer songs, wasn't like on a minute and a half kind of joint, but not necessarily like, I don't know, wasn't bad, but it didn't really capture my attention too much.
Yeah,
I wasn't
that's the only
paying
one
too
I
much
didn't
attention
listen to.
It's interesting because that one from 2016, the Harley Flanagan CRO-MAGS record I mentioned, that one,
Yeah, I've heard that's really good.
it is really good, and that's closer to a return to form. It just sounds like D-beat, but played by like a really tough guy from New York. So that one's cool. At the end of the day, I think it's not really the CRO-MAGS without, at very least, Paris Mayhew, John Joseph, and Harley Flanagan. So I don't think anyone can make a real CRO-MAGS record anymore. But if anyone could, Harley would be the guy to do it, because this story starts with him, and I guess for the time being, it's ending with him. John Joseph, no disrespect intended, but he's not somebody who can really write music. Although he had a new band called Blood Clot with some other people a few years ago. I have people from some other band. I don't remember who. I haven't listened to it. I don't know if it's good. My guess is that it's fine. But Harley, it's interesting. It's on one hand, it's like he is the CRO-MAGS. On the other hand, it's not really the CRO-MAGS without these other guys too. So
Yeah.
I would give just about anything to see a classic Age of Quarrel lineup of the CRO-MAGS do a reunion show. I'd pay a lot of money and travel great distances to see that. I'm not optimistic about it happening.
Probably not going to happen. A lot of classic lineups will never happen. A lot of reunions won't happen that maybe should happen. It's just the way life is. And I think ultimately the influence that CRO-MAGS has had on hardcore and, music, underground music as a whole, cannot be understated.
I would absolutely, as we discussed earlier, I would also feel remiss if I didn't note like the influence that they've had on me as a person. I started listening to them in high school when I got into all the other hardcore stuff. Always liked them. A lot of my friends didn't at the time because they saw that as like tough guy Earth Crisis stuff. Weren't into it. I always dug it. I was always like, nah, it sounds like Age of Quarrel sounds like punk still. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And I was real into them, and then they were like a perennial favorite that became even more important to me, like, again, when I decided I wanted to get my life together. Obviously, I wasn't dealing with the kind of shit that they were dealing with, living in a fucking squat with no running water, but I've been to some pretty dark places in my life, and when I was kind of getting out of that and deciding I was going to go to the gym and not be a scumbag anymore, I listened to Age of Quarrel fucking constantly. I had a line cooking job at this bar and grill, McGregor's, and I played it so much that like the assistant managers were like absentmindedly singing along to it because they heard it so many times in the kitchen. Definitely a band that if I need to snap myself into focus and overcome something and get myself out of the pits of sort of self-pity and despair and, feeling bad for myself, I can listen to Age of Quarrel or the demos that preceded it, and it will snap me right out of it because it's like these guys fought against a lot of fucking demons to make this record, and unfortunately other demons emerged, same demons came back, and everything went to shit after that, kind of, but excuse me, they were still able to do that, and that's more than most people ever do in their lives. And I think the power of that early CRO-MAGS material is that you can hear all of that blood, sweat, and tears and suffering and violence and nihilism all sort of, it's like just one big grand overcoming of that, but at the same time, it embodies all of that. And that is a really powerful contradiction. And I think a lot of the best music and art is contradictory and paradoxical. I mean, even just the idea of like two drug addicts or drug abusing, like violent scammers being really into Krishna consciousness, that's a huge paradox. It's laughable. But again, a lot of the best art is paradoxical. And I think that it's really important art, the CRO-MAGS, because of that and because of everything we discussed. And even if it's not normally your style of music, if you're a music fan of any kind, you owe it to yourself to check out at least Age of Quarrel and the demos before it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a huge New York hardcore fan, as I mentioned earlier, but I'd be remiss if I didn't include like Age of Quarrel and like one of my definitely a top hardcore releases like of all time, and very important band. I think it's
probably my favorite.
I will say
personally,
also
honestly,
it's interesting. I think they have a pretty similar. I was telling Tim this maybe I don't know if you heard a few days ago, they have a pretty similar like how they trajectory as like Agnostic Front. They have United Blood, so Agnostic Front, United Blood, which is like is that their demo, or is it just kind of like their
Well, that's like a
first-
7-inch, I
like
think.
their It's 7-inch, yeah.
They're 7-inch, we'll say.
With Rabies on drums.
And then they have
Victim in
Victim
Pain.
in Pain. Then they have the crossover record.
Not it's Liberty
Cause for Alarm.
and then
So,
Liberty and
Written
Just.
by Peter Steele for the most part.
So I think it's interesting in that like there's a similar trajectory in like how even the CRO-MAGS goes about it. Like you have the demo that a lot of people fucking like. Some people think that United Blood is the best Agnostic Front record. Most people tend to think Victim of Pain is the best CRO-MAGS record, which people also think Age of Quarrel is the best.
Some people are, I believe our friend Henry said that Liberty and Justice is his favorite
Really?
one.
Okay.
Agnostic Front did, I think, in part because as people, they were not as fucked up as fucking John and
Yeah.
Harley, or Paris for that matter. They put out more material with more of a consistent sound. I'll say
I
that.
think so. I mean, I think like Live at CBGB's is probably their best.
That's like the archetypal
That's the one
Agnostic
you
Front
want.
sound.
That's
Yeah.
the one. I mean, it's got like everything on it. It's a great record. And then they have Cause for Alarm, which is like a crossover. They change up their style a little bit, a little more metal influence. You know, other people involved in writing it. Same thing with CRO-MAGS. The Best Wishes. They inject a little bit more metal, a little bit different of a style. I think a very interesting way how those bands that were what's the word for contemporaries, but
Yeah.
also like Agnostic Front were kind of like the like OGs, like they were around like 1979, 1980.
81 they were
81.
a band. I don't think any of those guys are more OG than Harley is, but he's
What about
he's
Vinny?
He's a very unique case. Vinny claims he was the first punk in New York City.
I mean,
Harley said he met him in 1979.
mhm.
So Vinny Stigma is very OG. He would be like the second name I would mention. But again, like Harley, just by virtue of who his family was at Max's Kansas City in like 76
Yeah.
and 77.
I would say
He played with the Clash and shit.
they were very contemporaries, both very important, both kind of in my mind similar.
Yeah.
How their styles kind of went in a sense, not like their lives. Maybe in a different time, like they would have gotten all that shit done. Like maybe Age of Quarrel could have come out in '85 or something like that. Maybe there's a thing where like their lineup stays the same, or the production on the record is better, and it's a fucking like now everyone's fucking playing with fucking distorted bass.
Don Fury produced it.
He produced Age of Quarrel.
No,
Or
I'm saying they should have.
Oh man, I mean, who would have thought? Like, who knows?
We should do AF next. It's interesting in Harley's book, and I've read about this elsewhere. There was a split in the like New York hardcore skinhead scene between like people who were more on the sort of straight skinhead / like not far right, but sort of patriotic American to far right vibe, who were rolling with Warzone and AF, who did know John and Harley from way back in the day. Like that was one side, and then there was a minority of people on the other side who were the Krishna skins, who were down with Harley and John, which was fewer people because they were difficult people to befriend. They were not people who were big into making friends with the new kids, whereas Agnostic Front and Warzone were very much the mindset of, oh, there's new skinhead kids. Awesome. Like, they're our friends now. They can be on stage with us and shit.
I can see why Harley would be, consider he was like the person who brought that shit over to America.
Well, yeah, and
Like,
he was actually
yeah.
from the fucking LES and grew up like that and with all that tough shit, which I think the guys in AF, at least some of them did too, but not maybe to the same extent. And, yeah, having a bunch of people from Jersey and Long Island and Philly and wherever else coming in, I could see where he'd be skeptical. Especially since those people wanted to step to him and give him a hard time for not eating meat and shit.
Oh, right, for going soft.
We'll
yeah.
also say a lot of from like when Age of Quarrel came out to Best Wishes, like to 1990. A lot of stuff kind of changed. Youth Crew became a thing then too.
Yeah.
A lot of bands came sprang up from New York. New York, I think, fundamentally found its like sound in like 86, 87, 88.
Yeah.
A lot of like, I guess not a huge New York hardcore head, but that like late '80s stuff, obviously, like some of those bands were classics for a fucking reason. And
I
I got to
would
listen to them like more.
You
really.
should. Me personally, I think the best hardcore music ever came out in the mid to late 80s in New York and Japan, in my opinion.
Yeah.
What's interesting is the CRO-MAGS helped start that, but they didn't really keep up with the trends there.
No, because
they did their
but
own
again,
thing.
I read a really good article about Alpha and Omega, and it's like with a band that's like that, like any band that does any sort of like really influential like kind of record, and maybe they didn't know at the time how influential it would be, but like you can't just follow it up with the part 2. You
Yeah.
gotta kind of you listen to new things. You play those songs 150 times in a year, because you're on fucking tour with Motorhead and GBH, and you want to expand and do different things. You want to make, this not necessarily the sequel, but that's like your sophomore film. Like directors will have like this is their first film, and now their sophomore film is like something different. I think it makes sense that they made Best Wishes. Makes sense that they made Alpha and Omega.
I agree. The last thing I would note on that is the lyrics to Hard Times, the chant part at the end, CRO-MAGS, Skinhead, Breakout. I read Harley was talking about those lyrics, and he was like, that's about rebirth, I was a CRO-MAG, or we all were at one point in our evolution, and then I was a skinhead, and now I'm trying to break out of my current life. So I would just say you always, no matter what kind of dark places you've been to or how fucked up you've let yourself get, you always have the power, at least, mentally, or I'll say more accurately, spiritually, give birth to a new version of yourself if you really want to. Like, you can put your fucking head and your heart and your mind and your body to it and make it happen. And if you're looking for that strength, I would say listening to at least that early CRO-MAGS material could maybe help get you there, because it definitely helped me. And if that next chapter is shitty and it fucking sounds like the album Near Death Experience, well, you just got to do it again. And then you can learn jiu-jitsu.
Well, I think that about wraps up for CRO-MAGS.
Yeah.
We're the Kings of Punk. Go on Twitter, Kings of Punk Pod, Instagram, Cop Pod Official, KOP.
That's right.
POD Official. And hit us up with an
POD
email.
Official.
Yeah, we're the official POD. Sorry, having a little hiccups. Email us at kingsofpunkpod@gmail.com.
Yep. Kings of Punk podcast on YouTube. That's a work in progress that I'm going to try to catch up on this week, but we'll soon enough have we'll start clipping out highlight clips and getting them on there. So subscribe now, so when we start posting stuff, you'll be up to snuff on it.
Yeah, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
And Gary U.S. Bombs here with Bombs Way.
If the bombs don't get you, the warheads will.
computer.